Okay, well, I was going to say that I'm talking about, oh wait, this is not where it's supposed to be. Glyphosate, I'm kind of using as a poster child for a lot of problems, and I thank you for this opportunity. And Skylar, I love your T-shirt. Glyphosate really, people don't often realize this. It's actually all these products in one. It was initially developed as a chelating agent, which takes minerals out of steam pipes and boilers and so on. It also does the same thing in our gut. It also does the same thing in the soil. Then it was patented as an herbicide to kill plants by disrupting the Shikimate pathway. Then they wanted to use more Roundup, so they developed, the GMO plants. So they use Roundup-ready crops, so now they can inundate it with Roundup, so there's even more glyphosate in our system. Then in 2000, they started using it as a staging or a desiccation agent, which is really convenient for pre-harvest treatment. And then it was patented in 2010 as an antibiotic. So most of us know most of us know glyphosate as Roundup, and there's other glyphosate-based herbicides. But in 2015, it was classified as a probable carcinogen. You want to know how much Roundup is used in this country? You can see this is the projection over the time period from 1992 to 2013. 2013, almost 300 million pounds are used in agriculture alone, and this does not include what's used along the highways, what's used in people's backyards, parks, and so on. And it doesn't account for spillage and waste. So I mentioned Roundup-ready crops. So it was originally soybeans, but now includes all these other crops, alfalfa, canola, corn, so on. I also mentioned the desiccant, not on organic crops, but as a desiccant, it's used on all these crops. I mean, these are not non-GMO crops, but it's used as a desiccant pre-harvest. So it soaks into the crops, it ends up in the food. You can't wash this stuff off. It's systemic. So it's in the food. It's in the cells of the food. I mentioned the antibiotic. Well, of course, as a chronic antibiotic, when you're on a chronic antibiotic, it leads to antibiotic resistance. But what I wanted to mention here is, imagine the consequences of farmers spraying 10 million metric tons of any other antibiotic like penicillin or tetracycline on your food supply. People would go nuts. It'd be outraged. And it's happening. The gut microbiome. I don't know how much you know about the gut microbiome, but all the organisms that live in your gut, if you took them all out, it's about the size of a guinea pig. That's how much is living inside you. This is what controls you. It controls your thoughts. It allows you to think. It allows you to be well. It goes on and on. This is what we need to keep healthy, to keep us well. If you have chronic glyphosate exposure leads to chronic illness, basically. So the essentials here is that it interferes with bacterial production of essential amino acids. And amino acids are the basic structure of proteins, and proteins are crucial to all of our biological processes. So you don't mess with them. You mess with them, you mess with everything else. It gets better in a minute. How do we get exposed? We get exposed through spray and drift. It depends on what methodology is used, how much drift there is, and so on. We also, as it is used, then it can also come back to us, haunt us in rainfall because it goes up by evapotranspiration. It also runs off into streams and lakes and so on. But the rainfall thing is really freaky because, you use it over here, but yet your organic produce production over here gets rained on with glyphosate. Then you have contamination. So it ends up in our food. Lots and lots of food. So at both the congressional briefing and the EPA briefing I had last week in Washington, I asked the question, does anyone think we should bring back DDT? Well, nobody in their right mind would say yes, and nobody did. But I assure you, glyphosate is infinitely more harmful to people, animals, and the environment than the DDT. As you'll see why in a minute. And say, well, why are we still using it? Well, because we've been misled by the industry, by government, and so on for the last 40 years. But last year, my colleague at MIT, they managed to get tens of thousands of pages of the original research data from Monsanto and DuPont. We have all that now. We're going over it. We're publishing it. I mean, there's a significant paper that I'm going to talk about, but it's going to be published. It's already in press. We're just waiting for it to come out. So it definitely poses an unreasonable risk to have adverse effects to humans, animals, and the environment. This is the crux of it. Glyphosate's a synthetic amino acid, and it's an analog, a structural analog of the amino acid glycine. Without getting into details, this is very, very important. Glycine is a very important amino acid. So when your cells are trying to make proteins, they're trying to make enzymes, they're trying to make neurotransmitters or whatever, it can grab glyphosate instead of glycine. Now the protein, what we say, misfolds, it's misformed. Now the proteins can no longer conduct the normal function that they would have. And it becomes just a freaking medical nightmare. I call it Frankenproteins. And the results are on innumerable, unpredictable diseases and disorders. So many that we don't have them all cataloged yet. This is kind of the mechanism of how it works, but basically glyphosate disrupts life at the most fundamental level. This is not like toxicity. This is different. Glyphosate is becoming part of the biological process. This is very, very important. And we just released this last week in D.C. So this is just a few of the diseases we know it's linked to. There are many more. I mean, it's really linked strongly to some more than others, like Alzheimer's, dementia, celiac disease, diabetes. Actually, all these is pretty well linked to. So people talk about gluten intolerance. We think it's really glyphosate intolerance. We have reasons to say that. This is prepared by my colleague at MIT, Stephanie Seneff. This is the new childhood, and this is the direction we're going in terms of health. There's no reason to be going there. We need to reverse this. We need to stop using glyphosate and 2,4-D and a number of other pesticides. I mentioned about it being a chelating agent. Because it takes essential minerals out of your system, depending on what minerals coming out, depends what disease you're likely to get or possibly can get. And so they say, oh, what about standards? Standards exist. Well, the standards are really meaningless. There's no rigorous scientific basis because the EPA has not done it right. I told this to them to their face last week. They didn't bat an eye, of course. And such standards are meaningless because with glyphosate, there are no safe levels because it functions at the molecular level. It causes cellular destruction at virtually any concentration. And of course, it's part of the honeybee colony collapse. It's part of wiping out the monarchs. It contributes to climate change in a different way. You have to think of the soil microbiome, similar to our gut microbiome, but the soil microbiome is it's a thriving community of, can I have just 30 seconds?
30 seconds, you got it.
A thriving community of microbes and animals that, among other things, besides preventing erosion and making nutrients and so on, they sequester carbon. And when you interrupt that cycle, healthy soil sequesters carbon. Done deal. Conventional chemical-intensive soil versus organic soil with more carbon in it. I could spend a day discussing this slide, but basically the bottom line is healthy soil means healthy plants, healthy people in the environment. The bottom line is, this is a summary, but the bottom line is that it needs to be banned internationally, and we need to move to sustainable, organic, biological soil management. That's what it's all about. So I guess I conclude. I would read this, but I don't have time, right?
Right, but we can read it.
Thank
you very much, sir.
You're quite welcome.
We can.